Welcome to Healthcare du Jour, where we dish up and digest the latest in healthcare. For the next 30 minutes, sit back as we bring you insight, commentary, and discussion on trending topics to the table, all expertly served up by our host and his guests. Healthcare du Jour is brought to you by Carium, the telehealth platform enabling healthcare's digital transformation, helping you care for people within the fabric of their daily lives. Now here's your host, Matt Fisher.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining as we dive into the hottest topics in healthcare. I'm your host, Matt Fisher. On the menu today is Sonia Singh, Senior Vice President at the Center for Consumerism at AVIA. Sonia, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Nice to be here.
So, Sonia, what I always like to do before really getting into the main part of the discussion is give my guest a chance to provide more of an introduction in terms of who they are and what they do. So the floor is yours.
I appreciate that. So as you said, my name is Sonia Singh. I'm a Senior Vice President at AVIA. I lead our Center for Consumerism. And actually, before I go into my role, I think it may be helpful to give a little bit about what AVIA is, why do we exist. So AVIA is a digital transformation partner to a network of about 50 health systems where we help them accelerate their strategic digital efforts. So we offer these services through our membership model as well as consulting services. But the idea here is, help health systems move faster, help them get unstuck. Now, we exist because we believe digital is going to be a key driver of innovative change across the healthcare system in the future. And our mission is to help these health systems just move faster, as I said. And it's fascinating because just, our position in the marketplace, we have this wonderful bird's eye view of what's working, what's not, the needs that are emerging across the health system. And we can, pivot to the needs that are most important to our network. So within that context, now going to my role, we organize our work at AVIA around three key areas. One is consumerism, continues to be top of mind for most health systems. Second is care transformation, and third is operational transformation. So in my role, leading the Center for Consumerism, I am really helping health systems think through how do we use digital and really pursue innovative digital solutions to transform the experience that consumers and patients have as they navigate the health systems, whether that's searching for care or scheduling an appointment to paying a bill. And we have developed over the last few years a framework of over 60 plus specific opportunities or capabilities where digital can play an outsized role in improving that consumer experience. So my team is a team of experts that's on a day in and day out basis working with these health system leaders to advance those opportunities specifically. And, they range from we've done most of our work around digital front door, and I'm happy to explain that in more detail if you'd like. But it ranges from optimizing virtual health, thinking about how do you make that payment and paying a bill and price transparency more effective. How do you think about more personalization in the healthcare experience, whether that's CRM or through other tools. And also what the next generation of access is going to look like. I think access has been the forefront of, topics that health systems have grappled with for years. And we have started to think about what's that next level? How can digital play a role there? But it spans a lot of different things around consumerism.
No, you've left a lot there to unpack, and we'll certainly try to explore as much of it as possible. But one thing I'm curious about in terms of your background is, how did you first get into healthcare?
Yeah, it's a great story. I grew up around healthcare systems. Most of my immediate family, mom, dad, uncles, aunts, cousins, were all part of the healthcare system. So, surrounded by doctors and nurses and clinicians. And I think early on, I developed a really deep respect of the profession and the calling, but also grew to observe and recognize the systemic problems that exist in healthcare, the complexity and navigating care, this confusion around costs and payments and challenges in coordinating complex care. So I grew up observing that and being just surrounded by it. I ended up pursuing an education more in engineering and computer engineering and information systems, because what I liked is the idea of breaking down complex problems and systematically developing solutions for it. And I had started to see how technology was always going to be an underpinning to most problems we would encounter as a society. After that, I started a career in management consulting where right at the beginning of that career, I started applying those skill sets and capabilities to the healthcare industry. So started working with health plans and pharma companies and health systems. And it was a great confluence of my passion and kind of longing to be part of the solution in healthcare and bringing sort of my engineering and problem-solving capabilities to it. And that's how I ended up working in healthcare and, landed at AVIA about 4 years ago, because my management consulting career had largely focused on consumer strategy, digital strategy, and that's how I ended up here.
How do you think that personal experience of growing up and seeing, as you said, the clinician and other care delivery aspect and the systemic challenges that your family members would encounter, how do you think that influenced your approach to the consumerism aspect and the kind of that growing focus for healthcare?
Yeah, I think I have a deep empathy for both sides of the patient and the consumer, of the problems they're facing as a human navigating the healthcare system, but also the empathy for the clinician side and how hard it is for them, given kind of the gaps and the brokenness in so many parts of the system as well. So I feel very passionate about we are seeing these gaps. We know there are solutions for them. What can we do, myself and then collectively, to start to address those?
And coming from that position of empathy, and as you said, there's so many solutions now that are trying to address those gaps. What are some of the kind of more effective strategies that you've seen or that you advocate for, so tools can be accepted by both patients and the care team?
I think if you think about digital transformation broadly, with that lens of acceptance, I think a big piece is change management and buy-in. No tool is going to solve everything in a vacuum, and no tool is going to solve everything on its own either. It always has to be accompanied with the people, the process aspect of it, to make sure it's actually being incorporated into the workflows of both the clinician as well as what consumers and their day-to-day. And then how do you surround the technology with the right operations and the right acceptance? I do think that's how I think about digital transformation. It's like the tool isn't the silver bullet. It's an important part of it, but it needs to be surrounded by all of those other aspects to be successful.
Yeah, no, I think that certainly makes sense, because I think too often kind of a hype cycle tries to posit a solution as that silver bullet. But, I think, as I said, I very much agree with you that you have to think about how it fits into the broader picture, because you need so many different things working in concert together.
Yes.
So kind of, I guess, maybe taking a step back from that, now, and kind of going back to a lot of the concepts you were introducing up front, maybe it would help to, from your perspective, get a definition of what consumerism actually means. Because that feels like one of those terms that has become so commonly thrown around that it's not actually clear what people mean by it. And it's maybe to some degree getting inappropriate negative connotations in some aspects as well.
Yeah, that's fair, and a really good question, because you're right. I think terms like consumerism, digital front door, we've seen 100 definitions of it. So mine is one of them. But, when I think about what is key learnings from what consumers have expressed they want, they need, and also what they're being trained to expect from other sectors, right? So I think about it as convenience, it's transparency, it's simplicity, and moving towards more personalization. Digital front door is a great example of it, and we have a way of thinking about what are the key aspects of what makes a good digital front door for a health system. But let's make it really simple for people to find a provider and book an appointment at their convenience. So why does it have to be that I have to call between 9 and 5 to make an appointment when I'm at work, when most people would rather get online and do it at 10 p.m. after their kids are asleep? So how do you incorporate what people's lives are and their need for convenience, their need for flexibility, their need for transparency? How do I know what it's going to cost? How do I know? Why is it on me as a consumer to sort through, multiple appointment types and clinical language? I just need to see a doctor for my child. So how do you streamline that? How do you make it simple? I think digital there plays such a big role because it is that great enabler of simplicity. It is that great enabler of convenience. That's how I think about some of the key tenets of what makes a great consumer experience.
And if you're thinking about it from that perspective, kind of going to the next step, how have you seen organizations successfully start implementing those kind of simplified approaches and enhancing the convenience? Because I agree with you, convenience is that's really the word of society at this moment in time, it feels like.
It is. I think there's a few different things. We've seen what's very helpful for a lot of health systems is to, just get out of their day-to-day because you're so mired in the complexity, you're so mired in the process, the legacy, technology, and just take a step back. And we do this at AVIA a lot, is like, let's just look at how other industries are doing. The reason we find consumers have this high expectations, as I said, they're being trained by their experiences in travel or retail or hospitality. So let's just take a very simple, oversimplified, I know, example of booking a hotel room. You can go onto your Marriott app and you can just click the dates and the times and the type of room and the view you want. And it's all done in a matter of seconds. And then even moving into the actual checking into a room, you can do that through your app. You can ask for special requests. If you want more towels or you want a certain amenity in your room, like how convenient and how simple that is. You don't have to wait 3 days to make sure your room is actually accepted or, call to make sure and then get called back and be like, oh, you thought you booked this, but I need to move you now 3 days out. Like, which consumer would accept that, right? So that's one. I think learning from this is what people really need, and this is what's going to improve their experience and how they will access care. Then it's, asking people in your community, patients in your community of how do you want, what do you need, how do you want to access care? So we recently did a project with a cancer center on how to improve the process in their initial intake and registration process. And we knew we were going to go towards thinking about a digital solution. We involved 2 patient family advocates, one a current patient, and then one a family member of a patient who had passed. And they just described, their experiences, their pain points, and had such great ideas on how to improve that process. And it was very important to include their ideas into the process. I think there's also so much data that's now available. You can get data at a zip code level, at all different cuts and slices of people in your community of what they're looking for. So whether that's social data or psychographic data, how do you incorporate all of that into your decision-making process as you're thinking about what that consumer experience for your health system needs to be?
No, I think that's very interesting. And for those of you just joining, I'm talking with Sonia Singh from AVIA, and we've been talking about consumerism and kind of developing that experience. And I'd like to kind of dive a little bit more into one of the aspects you were just talking about, Sonia, which was as an organization is kind of thinking about a redesign or thinking about how to kind of implement a new workflow or new solution, you're talking about actually talking with and bringing in your patients to get their perspectives. So have you seen maybe historically a reluctance to do that? And if that had previously existed, why do you think it did, and how are perceptions beginning to shift in that regard?
Yeah, I think the big thing that we largely as a healthcare ecosystem need to overcome is this idea that, or more of a traditional way of thinking, that I as a health system or I as a provider know better. I know better than the patient. I don't have to explain everything to the patient. They should just do as I tell them, and they'll just do it at my way and my convenience. I think that world has completely shifted. We just can't operate with those assumptions anymore. It's just not an option, right? So the market has evolved so that if you don't offer what that patient consumer needs per their convenience, there's a lot of alternatives now. You can, if you don't get a visit that you need, if I call a health system and say I need a visit, and they say it's going to be 3 weeks out, And instead, I can get one within 30 minutes. I can do a virtual visit with a direct-to-consumer company. I think I might choose that option in most occasions. So how do you start to take into account, one, that we can't be that patriarchal, if you will, to patients of, we will tell them what you need to do and they don't have a voice. It's acknowledging that they have a voice and they have needs, as well as there's enough market competition now that you can't stay with that old way of thinking and that old approach anymore.
And kind of thinking about that, how do you see kind of a balance being struck in that regard? Because it's, at this, while on the consumer, the individual side, you want that access and that convenience, that then also places more stress on the clinicians in terms of having to respond to that while also still being flooded with the usual kind of influx of patients or visits of patients. So how have you seen people trying to balance the interests of all sides?
Yes, it's a good question. And I think you have to think about that at a capability by capability level. So take virtual visits or take, online scheduling, for example. As you start an effort that looks at, we are going to think about improving self-scheduling, online scheduling for patients across the system, or we're going to do this big visits rollout. You have to then start to think about who are your key stakeholders, your clinicians, your operators, your call center people, and your patients all being stakeholders, and see what their needs are across that. So in virtual visits, for example, you have to understand that there's certain processes that need to be done before the provider can see the patient. So they need to be roomed. They need to have somebody take that initial intake. How does that thing that happens in your physical visit or in-person visit translate to how it happens in a digital world, in a virtual visit? So that required people to think about the virtual visit as more than just a video Zoom call. It actually needs a virtual waiting room. It needs a way for the MA to room you. It needs a way for the MA to educate you. It needs a way for you to do a checkout process that you would typically do at the front desk as you leave your appointment. So you have to take what is working now, the necessary aspects of it, and think about, okay, this is what we will need when we do roll out a virtual visit solution, while incorporating, here are the things that will make that virtual visit really simple, convenient, easy to use for the patient as well. So that's one example, but I do think you have to think about it at a capability and solution level.
And I really like that description, because as you said, it's, each solution is going to require different translation of a workflow or a different change or kind of modification to what you're doing. But also, I think one of the key point to me that you raise is you have to think about it. You can't just expect that it's going to work without designing around it.
Right. And we saw that, with virtual visits in particular, we have done so much work over the last 2 years. The pandemic has been, I think everybody, we call it the great accelerant of digital transformation in the last 2 years. So people who had like a 2-year plan to set up virtual health at the health system now did it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And there was a need of the hour at that point where you just had to put something in. So everyone stood up, a Zoom something for their providers or some sort of very quick video solution. But and that worked for a bit, but very quickly started to realize, I need to do that front end and back end piece, the virtual waiting room, the rooming, the intake, the checkout, the billing, all of that needed to fit in. So then we saw a shift we put in something very quickly in, March, April time of last year, and very quickly we had to adapt it so it worked in a sustainable fashion for both our teams as well as the patients.
And in terms of getting to that kind of sustainable place, what are some of the kind of primary remaining challenges that you're encountering or that you're working with your clients on when it comes to getting past the emergency patch? Because it feels like there are still a lot of those out there. And but as you said, starting to hear more of the exploration for, okay, now we're actually thinking about this. But again, what are kind of the big challenges that you see organizations still working through?
There are a lot, I would say. Digital is so broad. There are so many opportunities. I think a lot of people sometimes conflate like, oh, I did digital, meaning I did virtual visits, but it's actually, maybe 100, 200, 300 things you could do, from improving how a person pays a bill to transparency to, engagement in between visits, to even from a operational transformation. How do you improve that prior auth process? So I would say there's a lot of outstanding challenges that still exist within healthcare for digital, which is also opportunity, right? Like we have so much opportunity for us to improve bit by bit the patient experience, improve the care experience, improve the clinician experience, and actually improve the workflows and the infrastructure that makes our health system run. So the whole infrastructure as well. So that's why we at AVIA, we have these three big centers that look at it from all different angles. And we have a whole list of opportunities and challenges that we are currently working with our health systems on. And the list keeps growing. But obviously, we have to focus on what's most important now. What's the need of the hour now? How does it fit into the broader context? So, for example, right now, the need of the hour is the workforce issue, because it's the number one topic that all the CEOs of health systems we work with are grappling with. Is there's a severe and really a national crisis of workforce. People have just left the workforce, they're burnt out, they've moved to other professions. And with this latest variant of COVID, they're out quarantined. So we have a severe shortage, but the volumes keep getting bigger. So how do we think about restructuring our infrastructure and just how we enable care? How do we do all these administrative processes with digital so that you can address that workforce issue from the short term and long term? An example there is, why do we have to have the humans have addressed very kind of minor administrative issues like resetting a password or readjusting a schedule appointment? A lot of that can be automated, and digital can enable a lot of that self-service, which improves the patient experience, but also actually addresses the workforce issue, right? So you're reducing you're keeping the humans that are available to work at the highest level task. So that is the current challenge. If you ask, like, what is the number one thing we are working with health systems on? It's how do we think about digital to alleviate the workforce shortage issue?
And kind of taking that another step is of the digital alleviating stressors on both sides. Because I agree, if you can streamline a process, it's usually going to find benefit both for the user and the company putting it out. But does the fragmentation or the historical fragmentation of systems and processes within healthcare, kind of hinder that implementation to a degree?
That's a great question. It does. It does. It is one of the challenges that we have to work through. It's one of the barriers to getting adoption. And this is why it's a long process. You have to do it bit by bit. Take scheduling, for example. We've done a lot of work around enabling health systems to put self-scheduling as an option for patients to schedule on their own. But you can't just roll that out across the system, across every service line, across the affiliated providers, because of that connection of processes, legacy systems that don't always talk to each other. Now, maybe 5-10 years fast forward, we will have a better infrastructure that enables health systems, and we'll be able to turn on digital much faster. But right now we have to do it in stages. So we have to think about, okay, we'll start with a primary care practice, for example, then let's move to another one. And you have to roll it out in stages. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why, while the technology exists, while there's millions of dollars that are going into digital investment at a clip we've never seen before in healthcare, it is still slow. I think the plumbing that exists within healthcare, the infrastructure, the process, the legacy is broken. So until that becomes seamless, we're only going to be able to see that much speed in how digital can transform.
Yeah, kind of as you're saying, if you don't have the solid foundation, and at this point, I think as you were just describing, it's kind of going back and either ripping out the existing foundation or kind of repairing it so that way it actually is one solid foundation. Until you've got that, I think it's a great observation that it's almost impossible to move very quickly, because you're not going to be able to implement the more advanced feature if you don't have the basics in place.
That's the rate limiting factor right now. And I think people are starting to come to the realization that the foundation either needs to be replaced or fixed. So we're seeing some folks take some very bold moves of re-platforming their infrastructure. But that's a hard and scary process that is going to involve everybody. And I think we're seeing a few bold executives make that move, and I commend them for it. But it's not for everybody right now, given not only the broken infrastructure, but also the stress of the pandemic and just the burnout that the workforce is facing right now. It's just like adding one more thing to their plate is just, we don't want to take them over the edge. So it's, we just have to acknowledge that the folks in this industry have been at it for almost 2 years, day in and day out, relentlessly. And it's the workforce piece is just something to be so sensitive to right now.
Yes, no, I think that's kind of, as you're saying, layering in yet another challenge on top of, this kind of fundamental issue, which is to some degree, no matter when you do it, it's going to be very painful and time consuming, but it's kind of, when can you do it when there are as few other outside stressors as possible?
That's exactly right.
So kind of, believe it or not, we're already almost at the end of our time. So I'd like to kind of close with one final question, which is, what do you think is currently the biggest challenge that's being overlooked?
I think there's so much white space in certain areas. When I think about health equity or community engagement or, the upfront piece in the value chain around navigation, those are still areas that there's still a lot of gaps in. If you want to have a truly connected, seamlessly engaged health system or experience, I think those all need to be addressed as well.
And no, I think, as you just said, some very serious and very long-standing gaps that are really kind of just coming to light and getting much needed kind of time in the spotlight. But kind of, as I said, believe it or not, we are out of time. And I want to thank my guest, Sonia Singh, for a great conversation today.
Thank you for the time. This is great.
And thank you to everyone listening. Keep the dialogue going and connect with me at #HCDEJURE. I'm Matt Fisher. Until next time.